Hello, everyone, and welcome to Armstrong in the Loop podcast. I'm your host, Seth Prentice. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Joe Sweeney, CEO and founder of the Asservo project. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Seth. Hey, I appreciate your time and having us on.
Hey, I know that your time is very valuable and we're going to get you in and out of here, but I thought it would be a great opportunity for you to share your message, talk a little bit about yourself. And then we're also going to get into, your organization, the Servo Project, as you're doing a lot and we need to get that information out to the community. So let's start off here and, tell us a little bit about yourself so that way we can build into, what we're going to talk about today.
Sure. Well, thanks. Born and raised here in Pittsburgh, still live in Pittsburgh. I guess my career started in law enforcement in 1992 and got hired with the Pittsburgh Police Department in 93, where the majority of my career, my assignment was on the SWAT team and bomb squad, where we were full-time and quite busy at that job for a number of years. And then after 9/11, I had an opportunity to go to work at the Homeland Security Explosive Division. I got an offer that they were standing an explosive unit up to combat IED attacks in the United States. So I was fortunate enough to transfer into federal government service in 2003. And I did that for 4 years. And then at the end of 4 years, I also had an opportunity to transfer into U.S. government security contracting, where I made that move in 2009, where I'm currently still employed.
I'm sure you've seen a lot during your time. How do you feel over that period of time? What has been the part that has interested you the most in not only protecting all of us, but dealing with different things that I myself may not see every single day.
Yeah, well, this human trafficking piece started about 5.5 years ago. I was working overseas, and a former colleague had been rescuing kidnapped American children and asked me to give him a hand in that operational side. So I just really started doing my own research. I had heard about human trafficking. I heard about missing children. So for the next 5 to 6 months, I really just embedded myself in the research in amongst my deployments overseas on missing children. But what actually I found out was the scope of human trafficking and how every year the increase of the number of people trafficked, the number of revenue generated every year would go up. And it struck me odd that this horrific crime, basically stealing people's lives for the profit of money, kept exponentially increasing. So I reached out to some law enforcement friends of mine and some other government agencies, and I asked them about this problem. And they all basically had the same answer. They said, Joe, we don't have the manpower budgets to keep up. It's going to overtake the drug trade in the next few years. And it's a very complex crime to investigate, to solve, and to help the victims because of the way it's manufactured from a standpoint of how they groom these victims, how they put fear and coercion into their lives. They threaten them with the harm of their family or their children or themselves, for that matter. So the motto of the Asservo project was formed from those answers we got from law enforcement, that with my skills and background in law enforcement and federal government service, that we could actually have individuals with skill sets that can do a lot of the heavy lift, the weeks and weeks of investigation that sometimes turns out not to be trafficking or kind of a cold case, that maybe the leads are no longer there for them to follow up. So we thought if we could do the heavy lift for law enforcement, build relationships with law enforcement, and provide them a product which would save them a lot of time. And the people doing this are all former military law enforcement personnel. So we know the standards, we know what they need. We have open communications. If things change, if laws change, if standards change for prosecution, we can adapt to them very quickly. So that's really what kind of started the model of the Asservo project. And this was back in 2016.
So in the 5 years that the Asservo project, has been up and operational, how many cases or, have you been able to help and restore, those missing people?
Yeah, well, we actually incorporated in 2017. That 2016 year was basically doing the research. So we incorporated in 17, and we got our nonprofit status the same year in October. So the first year and a half to 2 years, we basically built the organization. We have a robust technology section where we know these predators hide and work online.
Mm-hmm.
So we built that section out first, and then we started to assemble our investigative team and our surveillance team and overseas operators is because these tips take us all over the world. I mean, we're based here in Western Pennsylvania, a lot of cases here, but one lead could take us to another country, which it has. So really, we've been doing caseloads for about a year, almost 2 years now.
Wow.
And well, I'll point out a couple. We've rescued one woman from the Middle East. We couldn't even get over there. It was during COVID. So we had to rely on our assets in that country, conversations, technology to try to locate her. And fortunately, after 7 months, we were successful. But when she got back home, she was not well at all. She was severely traumatized, and she's going through counseling and therapy now and is getting better, but it's a long road. We've handed law enforcement in the past few months 2 to 3 predators, child predators that we've identified. We probably have another 4 in the queue that we're currently watching and tracking. Children, there's probably half a dozen that the parents fortunately got in their kids' phones. They were tracking their kids' phones because these cell phones is what really these traffickers and predators use to groom these young kids. They'll find a vulnerability and they manipulate it. They get them to trust them. These kids are looking for something. They're either not getting it home or at school, or they're not the popular person. Maybe it's some troubles with a dysfunctional family and drug addiction at home that kind of pushes them out there, and they're vulnerable. And these traffickers and child predators recognize that, and then they befriend them. And the next thing you know, these kids are in a bad way. So fortunately, these parents were monitoring their children's phones. So there were 3 to 5 children in the last couple of years we were able to get ahead of. And we certainly turned that over to law enforcement, and they took care of it from there. So we prevented those meetings from these children, having contact with these individuals. So, and there's probably another dozen cases that we're still working. Very time consuming, a lot of man hours.
Is the trafficking worse than a drug ring? I mean, you mentioned that, this is happening all over the world. So, is this, worse than anything we've seen in the history of crime?
Well, let's be honest. I mean, people have been sold since the beginning of time.
Yes.
And right now, according to the people that track this information and the data of these crimes, they say there's more people enslaved now than any other time in history being sold for sex, also forced labor. Forced labor is a huge part of the global problem of trafficking, where they traffic these young kids to work in brick kilns, mines, whether it's lithium or some type of mineral that's a profitable commodity. And the kids, they basically, we've partnered with some other organizations that have been overseas rescuing these kids, and they basically work them to death. And then when they're done, they put them in a ditch and they cover them up, and they go out and they just get another 25 to 50 kids because they barely feed them. They all sleep in a one or 2 room home on the floor. The conditions are brutal. I mean, it's not even, I don't think words describe it. So not only is the sex trafficking piece also quite large, labor trafficking is a big problem. To compare it to the drug problem, they estimate that it will create more financial revenue than drugs in the coming years, because a person you can sell 10 times a day. For the drug dealer, you got to get the product, get the person to sell it. They sell it, they get the money, they got to do it again, right? They got to get more product. If you look at this as a business, people are a commodity. So I have a commodity that I can sell 10 times a day, 7 days a week for 10 years, or until this person either ODs, runs away, kills themselves, get arrested. The life expectancy in trafficking is about 7 years. And what that means is usually people spend 5 to 7 years in there before they make a decision on, somehow I have to break this bond here to get out. Even though they're threatening my kids or my parents or my brother or my sister, they have to find a way. Or sometimes they overdose. I mean, there's several different ways they leave. And they're not always very pleasant. So from that aspect, it is worse from the standpoint of what's happening to these people and the revenue that's generated by it. Traffickers typically deal in other criminal elements, right? This is all about money. So it's, traffickers usually are also involved in drug trafficking as well. Not all the time. Trafficking to some degree is safer because you have a demand out there, which is part of the problem. You have a demand even for children now. We're seeing an increase in demand of pedophilia. Like these child predators are out there looking for 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old girls and boys. And it's growing. And these are people, these aren't transient people hanging out at the bus stop. These are bankers. These are carpenters, plumbers, teachers, pastors, cops. I mean, it doesn't discriminate in any industry as far as a career. This is just a deviant lifestyle. And it also even transfers over to the demand of adults. So, the traffickers know that, and they run it like a business. They know how to advertise, they know how to market, and it's very successful, and it's safer than dealing drugs. Here you have somebody show up, they want to have sex with somebody, whether it's a minor or an adult. Drug trafficking typically is in rougher neighborhoods. People got guns. So it's a little safer from that standpoint. And I think that's what's attracted to it, and it makes more money.
What are you suggesting to parents or providing information to parents to help try to catch this before it starts down that dark path?
Yeah. The first thing is you have to have an honest conversation with your kids. The average age for a girl to be groomed into sex trafficking is 12 to 14 years old. And we do awareness and training events. It's about a 2-hour event. We talk about the problem. We talk about what we do. We talk about what you can do. And I tell parents, I says, you got to be the parent. You've got to be involved in your child's life. You got to be involved in what they're doing on these devices, on their computer, on their cell phones. These applications on their phones, there's dozens of them that are used to exploit kids. They start these chat messages, or there's these dating sites, and so you really have to look at your child's phone, look at the apps they have on the phone, and do your research. Look at what they're being used for. And some of them are pretty explanatory. Like there's Plenty of Fish, Bumble, Snapchat, Kick. There's one app that's called Calculator, which all phones have. So look and see if there's 2 calculator apps on the phone, because this calculator app, they hide all the other apps underneath. So that the parents check the phone, they don't see any of these apps that have been identified as platforms for the traffickers. And they're like, hey, I just checked my phone. It looks good. Well, they got 7 or 8 apps underneath this calculator app that they're using to talk to these predators, basically. So the parents have to be involved, and they have to have the tough conversation. And I've had parents come up, they've listened to our brief when we have these events, and they're like, well, my daughter or my son's 13. I just don't think I could have them come and hear all this. And my answer to them is either they come and learn it now, and of course they're not going to believe it, right? I mean, when we were young, we're all indestructible. It's not going to happen to us. We know what we're doing. Or you're going to be calling me later. And our phone rings every day with questions and potential issues of their sons or daughters being trafficked. But that's what I suggest. You got to do your research on their apps, on their phones, on their computers. There's software and programs you can purchase. Nothing's 100%. These kids, they know the phone better than we do. They really do. I got grandkids. If I get a problem with my cell phone, I give it to my 13-year-old grandson, or whatever. So that's what they have to do, and it's work, and it's and they're not always truthful with you. Let's face it. They don't tell you everything, and things that are happening at school, pictures taken of each other. They pass them around. That's going on. And then that's where the vulnerability comes in. If a trafficker or a predator gets into that little circle where they're all sharing pictures of each other, that's the thing to do in high school, then they manipulate them. They take those pictures, or they manipulate them, and they threaten them with, I'm going to put these out on social media. I'm going to share them with your family, with your church, whoever, right? So then they kind of have them, right? If they put a little fear into them, they're like, hey, I don't want that to happen. Well, just, all right, do this for me. And then they do. And then the next thing you know, what they don't realize is they've either been recorded or, they've been manipulated in some other way with whatever information this person received. So, it's a tough job for parents, but you got to get involved, and you got to be relentless. You have to be relentless because these traffickers are relentless. They want to come after your kids because there's hundreds of millions of dollars in this business, and that's what's driving them.
Is there a common trait that someone that has been vulnerable or starting to be exposed to a predator, that you might be able to start recognizing, a common trait, or, just that person's character just seems off?
For the victim?
Yes.
Or potential victim, we should say.
Yes.
Yeah, we see a lot of victims that are usually coming from dysfunctional families where there's really not a structure at home. There could be marital trouble at home, violence at home, drug addiction at home. That kind of pushes them out, right? They're looking for some structure. They're looking to be loved, basically, and they don't have that. So as they're out there, they're on these chat sites and these dating sites, and they're looking for something, right? What are they looking? They're looking for somebody to care about them. And the traffickers absolutely give that to them. And they can group, it's called the Romeo model, is they befriend them. They act like their boyfriend or girlfriend, and they build this trust with them. And it could be over months, 3, 4, 6 months. Then they finally maybe meet in that time. They'll go to dinner. And we're talking about, a 17 to 19-year-old age here, probably, or 15. And these people, even though they're older, they tend to be a lot older. They treat them well. They buy them things. They pay attention to them. They act like they care. And then once they have that trust, they learn things about them. And there could be some things that they don't want to share. They don't want people to know about them. Or they create a vulnerability where we've had cases where they've been drugged and raped and filmed. So now they have the video and they're like, well, now I need you to do this or I'm going to release the video. So now the person's ashamed, embarrassed, broken, basically traumatized, and they're in a position they don't see any way out of. So you really have to look at change of behaviors of the young people. We'll say young kids and young adults. Maybe sometimes one of the indicators could be they don't really have a job that pays for the clothes or the accessories that they have, right? This person's showering them with gifts, makeup, nails. Like, how do you afford that? You're 16, you're in school. All of a sudden you're coming home with all this, so who's buying this for you? Because we've seen models where they're trafficking kids while they're in high school. Basically, they go out after dinner and they come home at 10 o'clock, and here these people are have gotten them already in some fashion into their hooks, leveraging them to do what they want.
Now let's do the flip side. Say you have someone you work with that you might suspect could be an actual predator, because it's not like these people walk around with a stamp on their forehead, saying, hey, this is what I do on the side. Is there something that is a common trait that maybe, I should suspect this person, or, maybe someone should have a conversation with them because something could be going on here?
Sure. And that's an excellent question. As trying to identify a victim or a potential victim or a person that's being lured into this, the same goes with the trafficker. It's very difficult to spot. You're going to have constant contact to see these differences in their behavior, right? The potential victims or the trafficker. A trafficker could be, if it's somebody that's this. Now you're going to have to know these people somewhat intimately. You're not going to have to, if you got 100 employees here in cubicles and you only know 10, there's not going to be indicators of these people you don't know. But if they seem like they want to isolate the people around them, or if they hang around like really younger people, and they're trying to isolate them from their family or friends, they tend to be loners sometimes, but you have to keep in mind, this isn't really indicative across the board, right? This is just some indicators. But they could be business owners. They can be employers. Sometimes domestic servitude, you see they have a lot of help. And this is in a wealthier type environment. where you think, okay, we have landscapers and housekeepers and people like that, car service. But there's been cases where these people basically have been slaves in there. They have very little pay, or the pay that they do pay them, they charge them rent because they usually live on the property, so they can't get out of the hole. They're always in debt. They can be very violent people and manipulative, very forceful type of personalities, controlling, sort of more. It's all about them, their way. Like, I don't want to say narcissist, but just a very manipulative type personality is an indicator sometimes that they could be trying to control of other people. Now, if they have these traits, does it mean they're a trafficker? No. It's really hard. I mean, gangs, it's prevalent in the gangs. They're trafficking, a lot of sex trafficking in there because there's a lot of money in it. If you know somebody that seems to be traveling a lot, but it's really not indicative to their career. But once again, you're going to have to know these people intimately to really recognize or see something's off. One of the things we see sometimes when we're out, you'll see the difference of age. You'll see some really young girls, 15, 16, 17, and then you'll see a guy that's 50, like, what's this 50-year-old doing with these? Now, it could be his kids or grandkids.
Right.
But having been in my career for 27 years, I can almost tell you, I saw one not far from my neighborhood. He was getting gas, and I saw these girls inside the store. As soon as I saw them, they looked out of place, and I waited outside, and they got in this car, and there was no relation to this guy. You could tell he was actually nervously waiting for them. It had indicators, and I want to be careful to say that, like, not everything is trafficking, right? I mean, you can't listen to this stuff and then, hey, this is trafficking. You got to peel the layers back and really look. It could be, we've had custody problems, over children, one parent claiming the other one's abusing them. We've had, neighborhood squabbles of accusations made where there's kids being abused. There's a lot of people use this to gain attention for their own agendas, like trying to get custody. So you really got to be careful, but the indicators are a start. And we welcome all those tips and all those information, because that's what we do. We save the law enforcement community weeks of verifying, is it or isn't it? And I'd say, 60% of the time it is, but there is that 35, 40% where it's probably something else.
Well, and let's get into the Asservo project a little more for our listeners to better understand. You and your wife started this, and right now you have many volunteers, but the goal of this is not just volunteers. And I know you're looking for ways to expand this. What can the community do to help you?
Well, they can go on our website and take a look. I think a lot of questions will be answered. And if they need more information, they can reach out. There's a contact page on there. Reach out to us, and we can certainly get their questions answered. And in that way, we can build them to be a champion of anti-trafficking and an advocate by giving them the right information of what you can do and how you can do it. The volunteers are great. We have 30 now, and they do a wonderful job at events and coordination. We also have an operations section, and those people, it's mostly volunteers. We have a few part-time staff in there, and those are the ones that are doing the heavy lift. So what people can do is to share who we are. They could host a training and awareness event. They can host a fundraiser. They can introduce us to their network. This is a $150 billion war we're fighting here, and I can't do it with no money. The skill sets needed, I have, but the model is not going to last as a volunteer model, because the problem's getting bigger, and it's really getting tough to dig down into this cyber pieces where they're really doing some damage to these people. So introduce us to your corporations, introduce us to philanthropy, introduce us to a platform where we can share who we are. And that's one of the things, fundraising is always hard. And I'm not very good at it because I've never run a nonprofit from a fundraising standpoint. I can run operations and I can run an organization, but because we have a business and we were used to that. It's I call it force multiplying. Introduce us to people that can help. If we can get 5,000 people out there involved in some financial contributions, the amount of people that we can save is endless. I mean, there's no shortage of work. The leads come in every week, legitimate leads of people being sold for sex. I've had them as young as 5 and 6 years old. I've talked to survivors who said it started with my mother and dad selling me for drug money. I've heard that story more than once, and I continue to hear it. It's intergenerational, a lot of the abuse. That gets really difficult in the courts with custody and CYS. So we have to put surveillance and investigation people on that to peel back the bureaucracy of the government programs. They're trying, but they're overwhelmed too. So this stuff just keeps festering underneath the ground here, and it's just getting worse. So for us to do that, I got to be able to put people out there 7 days a week, digging into it. We call it, human intelligence gathering. You're just getting out there and getting this information right, getting it into the right hands of law enforcement so they can do their job. That's how the community can help. Also, talk to your kids, host the events. We'll come out, we'll talk to anybody. We've done them, since we started. They're usually well received. They're typically an hour and a half. And I think we answer a lot of people's questions, and some people then do want to champion the efforts. And basically they just go out and talk to their neighbors, their family, so we can get this training and education piece out there. We're not going to investigate our way out of this problem. We got to get ahead of it. We got to get ahead of the predators grooming the kids. We got to get out there and identify these traffickers who are continually identifying vulnerabilities, even in young adults, and put them in jail, hold them accountable.
What's the number one question that you get asked most frequently when doing these events?
It's usually about the kids and the phones.
Okay.
The parents ask about the phones and what they can do. And so we usually have some resources there, and we'll get links for them. I mean, if they just Google it, software to protect your children's phone, they'll find there's companies out there who'll sell you, a program that you can monitor the phone. And it's pretty inexpensive, reasonably. It's $5-6 a month. So that's probably the one question. The second question is, we have people come up afterwards with one of two things. They think they know somebody that's being trafficked or a child's being abused, or they tell us a story about themselves. What has happened to them is either a young person, or they may have some history in this. And since we've identified it being intergenerational, they're worried about their nieces and nephews that are very young. And I would ask them, well, why do you think they're at risk? They're like, well, because my uncle, let me tell you the story. And they go through this whole story. It was me and my brothers, and everybody was abused in the family. And we know this happened. And, and I'm saying, well, have you talked to the police yet? Many times they'll show me a police report. They're like, inconclusive. They know how to hide the crime. They know, for a while, they do anyway. They know how to get away with it. They know the loopholes. They know the system. And that's the second thing that happens at these events. It's shocking to me how many people have a story of abuse and have kept it to themselves for 20, 30 years until they'll hear our event.
How do you help break that cycle?
The recovery organizations that we have relationships with, they have obviously therapy and counseling. That's one way, is to get the victims or the people that have been unfortunately groomed or forced or coerced into this life. And then when they get healed, I mean, and it could be years, those people come out and tell their story, and people who are going through it or who are victimized currently, when they see a survivor talk, they really bond with them. And then the information shared, we get involved, or they go straight to law enforcement, whichever the case. And that's an interruption of the cycle. I'm not so sure that's breaking the cycle. I think harsher penalties, which are now starting to occur with the abuse of kids. 12 years. What's 12 years? I mean, this person's traumatized for life. Even if they can get healthy and get back, I mean, they still carry that burden. I think the penalties have to be much stricter. And that's just one aspect to break the cycle. I think there has to be a better job when these complaints are filed, tracking these kids, tracking these predators once they're out of jail. They get put on probation for 15 years. So what? You know, uh, Many of them are repeat offenders. They go right back to it. Let's face it, there's a mental health issue here with that.
Hmm.
I mean, there's something wrong here. And I just don't think that's being addressed like it should.
Well, Joe, anything else you'd like to share with us today? As you've shared a whole heck of a lot, but we want to make sure that you get your message out there too.
Well, just consider, every year it's estimated that 30 to 40 million people a year are trafficked around the world. And it has no borders. It doesn't discriminate against rich, the poor, any race, any gender. Uh, Everybody's a target. If they have a vulnerability that these predators and traffickers can identify, they will manipulate it. And for somebody to think that can't happen in my family, they're wrong. I've seen it happen in all types of families, all types of situations. So I really think they got to do their own education. They got to do their own research for their kids, especially, and try to protect their children. Um, we're in this game now 4 years. I mean, we're in it deep, and we're committed to this. We're getting busier. We can use the help. We can use the help. We can use the introductions to corporate sponsors. We're blessed to have a lot of skilled individuals around the table who are volunteering their time. But now I have more needs than I have resources. I have tip line messages waiting for us to follow up on, because that's how big of a problem it is. So we need to help. But any follow-up questions, they'll be happy to reach out to us on our site. We'll get up with them, and we'll be happy to speak with them and see how we can help them.
Well, thank you, Joe, so much for joining us today. I've learned a heck of a lot and continue wanting to learn and help and assist. And, we'll make sure to, get your message out there and try to get you out here in some of these local communities here in the northern western part of the Pittsburgh region, so they can continue to hear your message as well.
That's great. And then I didn't know if you had the tip line, Seth.
I do. So I would encourage people to call the Asservo Project tip line at 877 SAVE 994 with any information that could help the team. Once again, 877 SAVE 994. And there's also an email address, info@theasservoproject.org. Is that correct, Joe?
Yeah, that's it, Seth. Perfect.
Well, thank you again, Joe, and look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Hey, I appreciate your time, and stay safe. And anything we can do for you or your audience, just reach out. We'd be happy to help.
For Armstrong in the Loop podcast, I'm Seth Prentice, keeping you in the loop.
Are you enjoying Armstrong in the Loop podcast? Great news! All past and current episodes are available on popular streaming apps and websites. Search Armstrong in the Loop podcast and subscribe today.